Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Our today's topic is about the human skeleton. The framework of the body consisting of bones and other connective tissues which protects and supports the body tissues and internal organs. It is human skeleton. The skeletal system. Parts of the skeletal system. Number 1, bones, joints, cartilages, ligaments, bone to bone, tendon, bone to muscles. Divided into two divisions, axial skeleton and appendicular skeleton, that is limbs and girdle. Functions of bone: support of the body, protection of soft organs, movement due to attached skeletal muscles, storage of minerals and fats, blood cell formation. Bones of the human body. The skeleton has 206 bones, two basic types of bone tissue: compact bone, homogeneous, and spongy bone, small needle-like pieces of bone, many open spaces. It is compact bone and it is spongy bone. Microscopic anatomy of bone. The outer is lamella, it is osteocytes, osteon, compact bone, blood vessels, periosteum, matrix, central canal, bones are classified by their shape: long, short, flat, and irregular. Classification of bones on the basis of shape: long bone, example humerus of arm; short bones, example carpals of wrist; flat bone, example parietal bone of skull; irregular bone, for example vertebra. Classification of bones: long bones, typically longer than wide, have a shaft with heads at both ends, contain mostly compact bone, example femur, humerus, etc. Gross anatomy of a long bone: diaphysis, shaft composed of compact bone; epiphysis, ends of the two bone, composed mostly of spongy bone. Structures of long bone: periosteum, outside covering of the diaphysis; fibrous connective tissue membrane; Sharpie's fiber secure periosteum to underlying bone; arteries supply bone cells with nutrients. Classification of bones: short bones, generally cube shape, contain mostly spongy bone, examples carpals, tarsals; flat bones, thin and flattened, usually curved, thin layers of compact bone around a layer of spongy bone, example skull, ribs, sternum; irregular bones, irregular shape, do not fit into other bone classification categories. Examples: vertebrae and hip. Surface features of bones: sites of attachments for muscles, tendons, and ligaments, passages for nerves and blood vessels, categories of bone marking, projections and processes grow out from the bone surface, depressions of cavities, indentations. Types of bone cells: osteocytes, mature bone cells; osteoblast, bone forming cells; osteoclast, bone destroying cells, break down bone matrix for remodeling and release of calcium. Bone remodeling is a process by both osteoblast and osteoclast. Changes in the human skeleton. In embryos, the skeleton is primarily hyaline cartilage. During development, much of this cartilage is replaced by bone. Cartilage remains in isolated areas, bridge of the nose, parts of ribs, joints. Bone growth. Epiphyseal plates allow the growth of long bone during childhood. New cartilage is continuously formed. Older cartilage become ossified. Cartilage is broken down. Bone replaces cartilage. Cartilaginous model. Developing periosteum. Calcified cartilage. Compact bone developing. Primary classification center. Blood vessels. Medullary cavity. Secondary ossification center. Epiphyseal plate. Medullary cavity. Compact bone. Epiphyseal plate. Spongy bone. Replacement of epiphyseal plate. Bone features: a break in a bone. Types of bone fractures: closed simple fracture, break that does not penetrate the skin. Open compound fracture, broken bone penetrates through the skin. Bone fractures are treated by reduction and immobilization. Bone fractures are treated by reduction and immobilization. Realignment of the bone. Common types of fractures: comminuted, bone breaks into many fragments, particularly common in the aged whose bones are more brittle. Compression, bone is crushed, that is osteoporotic bones, common in porous bones. Depressed, broken bone portion is pressed inward, typically of skull fracture. Impacted, broken bone ends are forced into each other. Commonly occurs when one attempts to break a fall with outstretched arms. Spiral, break occurs when excessive twisting force are applied to a bone. Common sports fracture. Green stick, bone breaks incompletely, much in the way a green adults. Common in children whose bones are more flexible than those of. Stages in the healing of bone. Hematoma formation, fibrocartilage callus formation, internal callus fibrous tissues and cartilage, external callus, new blood vessels, and spongy bone, trabecula. Number 3 is bony callus formation, bony callus of spongy bone. Number 4, bone remodeling, heel fracture. Axial skeleton supports and protects organs of head, neck, and trunk. Axial skeleton, skull, cranium, and facial bones. Hyoid bone anchors tongue and muscles associated with swallowing. Vertebral column, vertebrae and disc, bony thorax, ribs, and sternum. Appendicular skeleton includes bones of limbs and bones that anchor them to the axial skeleton. Appendicular skeleton consists of pectoral girdle, clavicles, and scapula, upper limbs, arms, pelvic girdle, sacrum, and coccyx, lower limbs, legs. Articulation where joints meet, connect, and are formed. 22 bones in skull, 6 in middle ears, 1 hyoid bone, 26 in the vertebral column, 25 in thoracic cage, 4 in pectoral girdle, 16 upper limbs, 16 lower limbs, 2 in pelvic girdle, 206 bones in all. Skull, cranium, face, clavicle, scapula, sternum, humerus, ribs, coxa, radius, ulna, femur, patella, tibia, fibula, tarsals, metatarsals, and phalanges. It is hyoid bone, vertebral column, carpals, and metacarpals. The axial skeleton forms the longitudinal part of the body divided into 3 parts: skull, vertebral column, and bony thorax. The axial skeleton, the skull, 8 sutured bones in cranium, facial bones, 13 sutured bones, 1 mandible. Cranium encases brain, cranium encases brain. Attachments for muscles, sinuses. Bones of the skull. It is frontal bone, parietal bone, coronal suture, neural bone, frontal suture, frontal bone, anterior fontanelle, posterior fontanelle, sagittal suture. It is human skull superior view. It is human skull inferior view. Paranasal sinuses, hollow portions of bone surrounding the nasal cavity. The hyoid bone, the only bone that does not articulate with another bone, serve as a movable base for the tongue. The vertebral column, vertebra separated by intervertebral disc. The spine has a normal curvature. Each vertebra is given a name according to its location. Cervical curvature, concave, C1 to C7. Thoracic curvature, convex, 12 vertebrae. Lumbar curvature, concave, 5 vertebrae. Sacrum and coccyx. Coccyx is a fused vertebrae. Vertebral column: 7 cervical vertebrae, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 1 sacrum, 5 fused vertebrae, 1 coccyx, 7 fused. Vertebrae vary in size and morphology. This is the structure of typical vertebrae. Thoracic cage contains ribs, thoracic vertebrae, sternum, costal cartilages. True ribs are directly attached to the sternum, first 7 pairs. 3 false ribs are joined to the 7th ribs, 2 pairs of floating ribs. True ribs, vertebro-sternal ribs, 7 pairs. 6 thoracic vertebrae, costal cartilage, floating ribs. Difference between male and female pelvis. The pelvis is one of the most useful skeletal elements for differentiating between males and females. Female pelvis are larger and wider than male pelvis and have a rounder pelvic inlet. Male iliac crests are higher than females, causing their false pelvis to look taller and narrower. Male pelvis, and it is female pelvis. In male pelvis, opening is smaller, and in female pelvis, opening is larger. Pubic arch is U-shaped and pubic arch is V-shaped in male pelvis, while in female pelvis, pubic arch is U-shaped. Thank you very much. Allah Hafiz.